All right, everybody, welcome back to the audience, and there's three prize winners that we're gonna start with. We're just gonna have the little clicky thing, and here we go. The first name gets the AHWD prize, and then 2 gift cards, and then we're gonna get on with the politics of the fabulous Silver State. I can't wait for that with 3 power presenters and okay. Oh, got to get the glasses. We got Joe Lelucci. I hope I didn't butcher that, but make them aware and we'll send you your prize. And, oh, there we go. I got my glasses. I'm all ready. Is Steve Bruner on this list? I don't know. And we got Stephanie Grant. All right, congratulations, Stephanie. You win a gift card. We got one more. Here we go. And make sure you let them know so they can give you the award. And there's a drawing after this next event for 2 Battleborn subscriptions. That's George Picard. Well done, George. You get a gift card, and we're moving on to our last presentation of the first day. There's a drawing after this event for 2 Battleborn subscriptions, 1 Silver State Club subscription for the Nevada Independent. And just a reminder that this next session is pre-recorded, so there's no Q&A for this. And I kept you a little in suspense for this next one about the politics. This trio of speakers I'm introducing, there's a lot to be said about all of them. The first is a man who's been covering politics in Nevada for more than 30 years, a well-known award-winning political journalist and columnist who for decades has written for many wonderful, well-read newspapers. He's hosted multiple TV programs, including The Ralston Report and Ralston Live. And you might recognize him from his many appearances on PBS, Fox News, MSNBC, and of course, the historic and longest running TV show on television, Meet the Press. He founded the Nevada Independent in 2017 as a nonpartisan nonprofit opinion website and is one of the longest serving members of the media covering politics of the fine Silver State. Often called the unofficial dean of the Carson City Press Corps. In addition to all that, as if that's not enough, he's currently writing the definitive biography on former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. I'm speaking of none other than Jon Ralston. And joining Mr. Ralston today, 2 extraordinary legislators. We have Assemblyman from District 9, who's chairman of the prominent Assembly Judiciary Committee, where so many real estate bills go to and flow through. He also serves on the all-important Committee on Commerce and Labor and the crucial Committee on Revenue, part of the Assembly Speaker of the House leadership team and a valued, important friend to all realtors. We have Assemblyman Steve Yeager. And while I introduce the gentleman first, our second legislator, I expect everyone to be most likely completely familiar with, as she served as the 2017 Nevada Realtors state president and still a realtor, Nevada Realtor champion, and representing Assembly District 2. This Assemblywoman also serves on the Judiciary Committee, the Committee on Revenue, the Committee on Commerce and Labor, a critical key voice for the realtor community in Carson City. We're happy to also have with us today Assemblywoman Heidi Kasama. So welcome Heidi, Steve, and Jon as they talk about the state's politics in play. Take it away.
The both of you in front of this great group that I think we've probably all spoken to many times. Assemblywoman Kasama, I think, are you the only member of the Assembly Republicans who's actually coming back next session? The amount of hemorrhaging seems to be quite extreme, and I think Assemblyman Yeager is waiting to see what Jason Frierson decides. So maybe you two will be running the place. So you guys are the right guests to have, and I'm glad to have you here.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and it is a great question. I think, it is, it's part of the process in the Assembly. People come and go, their terms are up, they decide to run for something else. And so we seem to have a few that will be moving on to other areas. I think, there might be, a couple toss-up seats, but many of those seats are, unless we have a really crazy thing with redistricting, are pretty firmly Republican. So we'll have Republicans representing us in those other seats as well.
I did not mean to suggest otherwise. I was just having a little fun at your expense. I want to talk about some specific issues for this group, but also some broader questions about the legislature and the process. And having a freshman and more of a veteran here, I think will be great to have a couple of different perspectives. But let's start on something that you both had to deal with throughout the session and is of great interest to this group, and that is during a pandemic, how do you balance the needs of tenants and versus the needs of landlords, some of whom are not big corporations, some of whom are mom and pop operations, and how well did the legislature do that? And since Assemblywoman Kasama has kind of a home field advantage on you, Assemblyman Yeager, let's let her go first.
All right. Well, he might not have any time left after.
That's my plan. That's my goal.
That's what I'm here for.
So, I'm pretty passionate about this. I come from the real estate industry. Full disclosure, I also have a property management business. And so I personally feel that it's a taking of private property rights. I feel it is contractual interference. Right now, when the government mandates things like you can't evict people, and they're putting it on the backs of private citizens. And I manage about 370 properties. They're all individual owners. There's no big corporate owners, no big apartment complexes. I have investors that own one or two properties. The majority of them own one. And so the hardship that I've seen on them, I've had the owners calling into me crying. They've depleted their savings accounts, their retirement accounts. And so, to take that from people that have worked so hard to do the right thing, they're working hard, they've purchased their own home. Somebody said it's good to have an investment home, help set them up for retirement. I think is completely wrong. And I think if the government mandates something like that, then they have to supply the funds for it. So it's late in coming. The funding has come now, but it still hasn't gotten out to all the owners. I still have accounts where there's no money to these owners. It's been 12, 16, 18 months, and no money has come in. And if they don't want to ruin their credit and not pay the bills, that the banks have said that they could do it forbearance. However, I got to tell you, I had one owner that wanted to refinance their house, take advantage of these great low interest rates. The forbearance was showing up on his credit report, and the bank wouldn't do the refinance. So to say that this doesn't have an impact on the owners, it is completely wrong. And so
let me just stop because I see that you may be running for the U.S. Senate with your ability to filibuster. But I really do want to have a robust discussion about this because despite what some people think, there are two sides to this issue. And there's different philosophies, right? I'm going to get you in a second, Assemblyman Yeager, but I want to follow up with Assemblywoman Kasama first. It's different philosophies when Republicans generally think that the heavy hand of government is not good. Democrats generally think that government does need to step in. And so let me ask you, Assemblywoman, I mean, you kind of have both philosophies in what you said. You don't think government should come in and mandate certain things, even during a pandemic, when you would think that is one time that the government's responsibility is clear, which is to help people. On the other hand, you think that if government steps in, they should also bail out, and you're not going to like that expression, the landlords because of the hardship they face. So you know more about this probably than either Assemblyman Yeager or I do, having been in the business. But there are two sides to this, right? And two ways that government has to look at this.
Absolutely, there are two sides. But as I said, one, I don't think the government should step in. I think it is contractual interference. But if they have done it, then you've got to make the homeowner whole. You cannot take their livelihood away from them. You can't take the money away from them. So if the government is worried we have a pandemic. It is out there. It is a crisis for our society. We have unfortunately people that are succumbing to it. So it's a reality that we have to learn to deal with. But for the government to pick a private sector and say, you're the ones that are going to pay for this, you're the ones that are going to be in charge of taking care of this, that's not right. So either the government has to make that whole with money to them, or they have to come up with, housing, right away housing assistance, or which are things that are starting to come into place, but it's too slow and it's too late, and people have been damaged by it on both sides.
So let's talk a little bit, Assemblyman Yeager, in case people don't know, and they probably do. You are also a lawyer, so you're familiar with the term contractual interference that Assemblywoman Kasama used, and I believe not unintentionally. Is it not contractual interference for the government to step in and essentially rip up contracts that people have signed?
Well, first, John, thanks for having me, and it's good to be here with you and Assemblywoman Kasama. Let me say hello to folks who will be viewing this a little bit later down the road. And before I answer that question, I do just want to say thank you to everyone who has made sacrifices during this pandemic, because none of us are immune from that. And so just want to say I appreciate it. I don't see it as contractual interference, because what we're talking about is eviction. And eviction is a state law issue. It is dictated by our state statutes. So when, the federal government says you can't evict, and when the state government says that, or when the legislature comes in and changes the rules around eviction, that's a change of statute. So, that applies to everyone. We're not coming in and ripping up contracts. What we're saying is, you can't just throw people out on the streets in the middle of a pandemic, which I think we all agree we don't want to do that. But to get to your initial question, it's a tough balance, right? You want to protect people. You want to make sure they're housed, particularly in a pandemic when people aren't working and we have, a virus that's spreading like wildfire. But you also need to make sure you're looking out for landlords, many of whom are in the same situation. They're not having income come in. And so I think the response that you saw was really multifaceted. It was from the federal government. It was from our state executive agencies. I'll say I think Treasurer Conine probably did more than anybody realizes to work with banks to make sure that he was taking care of exactly that concern Assemblywoman Kasama raised, which was, what do you do when you have a mortgage to pay and you have tenants who don't have any money and aren't paying rent? Like, that's an untenable situation. But I know for sure he was on the phone browbeating the banks. And so I'll give him credit for that. In terms of the legislature, I will tell you, we rarely get anything perfect. It doesn't happen that way. We're there for 120 days. We have a lot of issues to deal with. But I do think at the end of session, when we were able to enact Assembly Bill 486, which is really the main bill dealing with the rental assistance money with evictions, I think that's a pretty good piece of legislation, because really what we were trying to prevent was a situation where there's money out there for you. It's taking a little while to get to you. And in the meanwhile, you are evicted, because Nevada has the quickest and only summary eviction statutes in the country. So I hear the concerns. Did the government act fast enough? I think we acted as fast as we could. But, the federal government says, here's tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, state, you can have these, help renters, help landlords, but they don't give us any personnel to stand up that program. So I think, our counties did as good as they could to be able to stand up a gigantic program that none of us knew was coming. And so what we really wanted to do was avoid that situation where someone was evicted and then like 3 weeks later they were told that, hey, there's some rental assistance money for you, which helps nobody. And I will just say, Assemblywoman Kasama came into my office. I think it was the last week of session. It's hard to remember. For a while, we were Zooming with one another rather than going to offices. But I remember she came to my office. So that tells me it was close to the end of session. And we talked about that bill for probably an hour and a half. And she shared her thoughts on some of the weaknesses with the bill, some of the concerns. And I think we were able to address some of those. And so I'm proud of the legislation we passed. Is it perfect? No. Is it getting better? Yes. I think the Nevada Independent reported yesterday that Nevada is now 10th in the country in terms of distributing rental assistance money. At some point, we were way down at the bottom of that list. So I think what you're seeing is that scale up and that ramp up. And, we can always do better, but I think we tried to strike that right balance. If you ask some tenants, they'll probably tell you we're too landlord friendly. If you ask the landlords, they'll probably tell you we were too tenant friendly, which maybe means we landed in the right place.
Mm-hmm. So let me follow up on a little bit what you said. Where did you say you read that story, by the way, yesterday? What publication was that?
was a very prestigious publication called the Nevada Independent with
That's
one of your fine reporters. But no, it was a great article. And by the way, I do want to say, I really appreciate the graphs that you had in there and the charts. I mean, those are very.
We're big on those, especially with stuff like this.
I'm a visual learner, so that's very helpful to have those. Thank you.
So let me show you. Let me quote from Assemblyman Yeager after AB 486 was passed. Which I believe probably most people watching this, I think you'd agree, Assemblywoman Kasama, are pretty familiar with AB 486. So he said, and you repeat a little bit of this, so you're at least semi-consistent, Assemblyman Yeager. I'm proud that we enacted common sense legislation that ensures that if a tenant files an answer to the summary eviction with the court, unfortunately most don't, the tenant will not be evicted if there is a pending application for rental assistance. So I'm going to get Assemblywoman, excuse me, Kasama to respond to that in a minute. In case people don't know, that bill passed by pretty sizable margins, especially in the Senate, and despite your lack of lack of persuasive powers, Assemblyman Yeager, she still voted against that bill. But seriously, the summary eviction statute, which I think a lot of people probably until the pandemic, general public, I mean, and even tenants probably were not that familiar with. You tried to address some of that in here. Do you, looking back on it now, believe that strikes the balance that needed to be struck or went too far?
I think it struck the right balance. And, as you noted, John, I don't want to get too much into the legal nuance of it, but this bill really only applies if the tenant affirmatively does something, goes to court, files an answer, and most don't do that. So I don't want to give the impression that somehow this stopped all evictions. It did anything far from that. There were a lot of tenants who, never applied for rental assistance, and they're not going to file an answer, right? They're going to get evicted, and that process is going to work. But for those who take the affirmative step to go to court and say, wait a second, I shouldn't be summarily evicted, which can happen in a matter of 7 days in Nevada. I think this bill did strike the right balance for the court to say, okay, let's take a look at that. And what I'm really proud of particularly is the courts have been able to work on a system where when a tenant does file the answer and they're in court, they can move that application up to the top of the line with the rental assistance agencies, which I think is the goal, right? We want the landlords to get paid and we want the tenants to be able to stay in housing. And so for those who are affirmatively asserting their rights and trying to get through this process, which can be difficult and can be confusing, I think it does strike the right balance. And, I think the numbers speak to that we're doing much, much better. And I think it's only going to get better from here on out. But as I said, I think there were some folks wanted us to get rid of summary eviction altogether. And then on the other side, some folks wanted us to do nothing and just have business as usual. But I think that would have been irresponsible of us in a pandemic not to try to address this. And I will say I'm very, very happy. I'm not happy, but I feel fortunate that we were able to get this bill passed, because at the end of the session, I think all of us thought we are sort of at the tail end of this pandemic. We're coming out of this thing. The building's open. People aren't wearing masks inside anymore. And then the Delta variant hit us. And so here we are in September, and we're back worse than ever in terms of numbers. So if we would have left the session without having done that bill, I think it would have been a colossal failure for us.
So you are very politely nodding to a lot of what Assemblyman Yeager said, Assemblywoman Kasama, and kudos to both of you for having a robust discussion about this in his office. And I've actually, not that this means much, but I've heard good things about you in that sense, Assemblywoman Kasama, that you were collaborative and you were willing to learn. You knew you were new. However, ultimately, you did decide to vote against the bill. Does that mean that you don't think there was anything good in there, or what was the straw that broke the camel's back for you?
Well, one, I do want to thank Assemblyman for allowing me to come in and visit with him, and we did have a robust discussion. And I do, I just have to say that one of the reasons I came to visit with you was because of the donuts. And so,
whatever it takes.
So it was an excuse to get into donut that I came to your office to visit with you. But and you did make some changes to the bill, which I sincerely appreciate so much. You made adjustments to it, I think, for some of the things that I found were so harmful. Most importantly, one of the sections of the bill, which now said that if the tenants are not trying to apply for assistance, that the owner can now dip into the funds that the state has set aside $5 million. And that's for, we want them to go after the money that's available to them. But if they're not doing that, and we have asked them and pleaded with them to do it, now we did add a vehicle to the bill where the owners can request that money directly. And if they can show that the tenants are not applying, they're not cooperating. And so that was a great thing that was added. I think what bothered me the most was we currently had, before this bill came into to be, we had a process. So when an eviction is served and the tenant is filed for that, they can go to court and they can request a hearing. They can say no. They can stop being out in 7 days. They can say, we want to have a hearing. We want to present our case. There's other reasons why we haven't paid rent, the roof's leaking, whatever it is. So we need a hearing for this to be able to present our case. And we already had that process in our court system. And so this gives an automatic 30-day extension again to it. And that is where I have trouble with it, because unfortunately, if you don't have money, you don't have money. This is aside from the pandemic now, because we do want the federal dollars to come through. We want them to flow through. But after, we're going to have this in place now, which just adds another 30 days, which delays the entire process, which I don't see a difference in the outcome if you don't have funding, if you're not applying for the funds. And I understand with giving time for the federal dollars to come through. And I have owners that have said, well, if I can get paid, I'll work with them. But the frustration that I've seen, and I know we talked about this a lot in various committee meetings too, is that there is many times a lack of the tenant being proactive with some of this activity. And so I have an example right now where we have the property manager's been pleading with this tenant. We've sent them the forms. We've sent them all the information to make the application and get the money. This has been going on for 12 months. The tenant won't respond, won't acknowledge our emails, texts, phone calls, and we can do nothing. So finally now, eviction moratorium is lifted. We file the eviction, we go to court, and in court, now the tenant applies for the funds. And so that is frustrating when we've been begging the tenant to do it for 12 months and the owner has not had any money. Now, this isn't all the cases, I understand that, but I think this process allows that to happen. And that's where I had heartburn with it.
So what do you think about that? Is the situation, Assemblyman Yeager, that your colleague is describing an outlier, or is it a real problem that comes as an outgrowth of this bill?
I believe it's an outlier. I mean, there's a requirement in the bill that you apply in good faith. And so we have our justices of the peace and their hearing masters deciding whether a tenant has acted in good faith. And I can tell you for sure that oftentimes the judge decides they haven't acted in good faith. Just showing up to court and saying, well, I just applied 20 minutes ago. I mean, that's not a good faith effort. So those folks are getting evicted. And the other thing I'll say is this bill expires I think at the end of the next legislative session. So I don't want to give anyone the impression that this is permanent, right? Hopefully by then we've expired all this federal funding. Really what we were trying to accomplish is this situation of why would we evict someone when there's hundreds of millions of dollars of federal money for rent relief? And if we don't spend that, we give it back to the federal government. It's not like we get to keep it. And in terms of the 30-day delay, that was something that was enacted in the special session back last July. And that's 30 days to go through mediation, because what we found, not surprisingly, is when you get together in a room with someone and you talk it out, sometimes you can reach a resolution that you wouldn't otherwise be able to reach. So in this process, either party can elect a mediation, and that mediation is conducted where the tenant gets in the same room with the landlord. And it doesn't always work, but sometimes just hearing what each other is going through has a way of leading to an outcome there that keeps the tenant in. So I understand there are delays. I think there are outliers on both sides of this issue, but no legislation is perfect. And I think for that middle of the road person, we're just trying to do the right thing to say, why in the world would we leave federal dollars on the table and evict somebody? Because here's the truth: once you get evicted, even if you get a letter 3 weeks later saying you qualify for rental assistance, no one's getting that money at that point because you're not in the place anymore. So the landlord doesn't get the money, they're out the money. they have to try to collect it from the tenant if they want to go through, sort of collection procedures. And then they're having to look for a new tenant. So that really is the definition of a lose-lose for everybody. So again, not perfect, but I think we're mostly getting it right. And Clark County in particular is scaling up, where they hired hundreds of new employees to be able to process these applications. And, that situation that Assemblywoman Kasama talked about, well, let's say someone does go in court and say, well, I just applied yesterday. I understand the frustration that the landlord is saying, hey, you should have been applying 3-4 months ago. What the heck took you so long? The good thing about this procedure is that application is going to the top of the list. So, they're going to get a decision pretty quickly, and the court will be able to move one direction or the other from that.
And I just have to add that, I gave one example, but in my small business, we've had multiple of those. It isn't just the one. So it has been an issue where the tenants, unfortunately are deciding that we don't have to do anything, no matter how much we request and ask them to make the applications for the CHAPS fund. And the goal is to have them do the CHAPS funding first, and then the state money is available if that is not pursued.
I guess, and this goes to some overall philosophy of government and what government should do. During any kind of cataclysm, a pandemic, what happened in 2008, the economy collapsed. Government, to some extent, has to act. But what both, I think, representatives of either party should worry about is that government will overreact, right? And so there is some middle ground there. And I guess what I'm wondering, and let me start with you on this one, Assemblywoman Kasama, and I'm sure you've thought about this because you're obviously a successful business person. You've thought about government. You've thought about your philosophy of what government should and shouldn't do. Do you think generally that AB 486 and any other bills that were passed were an overreaction or a necessary reaction, or where does it fall in the spectrum, in your opinion?
Well, I think I already, stated that. I think, and again, thank you for the Assemblyman for making some adjustments, but I still think it was too much of an overreach. And I think I stated that I think the additional 30 days, I disagree with, because we already have a process. You could go in and you can request a mediation, you can request a hearing from the court, and they will delay it. We already had that process there. And so, and you're talking to a Republican. And so do I think there's government overreach? Yes.
But you also, I would think, you talk about contractual interference and government overreach, which I've seen. So unfortunately, I've been around a long time, many times in Republican campaign mailers. And I'm not saying it's not legitimate. I'm just saying that, don't you think that during a pandemic, when obviously the economy's gotten crushed, and I'm going to get to those policies in a moment, that the government needs to step in and help both tenants and landlords?
So I think we already had those processes in place. And with the funding that came from, as far as the procedures, just the procedurals to go through evictions, but the government did step in with the funding. The problem is, as we spoke about, it wasn't getting through the system fast enough. Is there an easy solution for that? I understand that is difficult. Nobody can prepare for a pandemic. It hits our entire community, states, nation. And so it is difficult to get that out. Should they have hired, hindsight is easy, I know, for all of us. Should they have hired more people sooner, faster, get the funding out there? Because it is crushing to our community, crushing to, our citizens. And so I think having geared up sooner would have been better.
Interesting. I want to provide these folks with a window into your philosophy on these kinds of things, Assemblyman Yeager. I would think that part of the issue here, and I hate to say that I would have fallen into this category when I was a renter, is that many tenants do not read either the agreements that they are signing with landlords or know much about the law, certainly. And so then the determination becomes, how much is it your role, meaning not Assemblyman Steve Yeager, but government's role to say, okay, you don't understand this, we're going to help you, versus, them doing what they should do. It's the nanny state versus government's responsibility, right? To use more language I've seen in many campaign mailers. I do think these are interesting philosophical questions to answer, Assemblyman Yeager. What do you think?
You make a great point, John, which is, I mean, tenants and landlords come in all shapes and sizes, all varieties, all intellectual capacity. And, I think for me, one of the number one things that's helped is just through my campaigns, knocking on doors and talking to people. And you realize, these are complex processes. Not everyone understands these things. Some people understand them very well. And, sometimes it's not a lack of an ability to understand, but when you're, working 40 or 60 hours a week and you're making minimum wage and you're trying to take care of your kids and they're in school and now you're homeschooling them, there's just so much mental capacity someone has. And so I do think there's a role for government and for our state agencies to try to get that information out. I mean, it was an all hands on deck to try to get this information out. Legal aid did a fantastic job. And I will tell you, even despite all of that, if you were to walk around and knock on doors and talk to people, I bet you 5 out of 10 have never heard of this program. They have no idea that rental assistance is available. And we're sitting here thinking, how do you not know that? It's all over the news. We're arguing about it in this broadcast today. But, people you need to try to meet people where they're at. So I think government does have that responsibility to at least make those programs known and try to help those. I mean, some just do not have the ability to navigate this process. I will tell you, you said I'm an attorney and I think I'm decently bright. I don't understand all these processes. These are very complex. And when you have a summary eviction process that can happen in 7 days, I mean, tenants will see that notice posted on their door, and a lot of them freeze, right? They don't really know what they're supposed to do. They look at it and they say, well, I don't really know what this is. And they throw it on the countertop and they forget about it. And 7 days later, their locks are being changed. So, I think government has that responsibility. There is, of course, personal responsibility that comes with this, but I don't think we can just say that this is always willful neglect or turning a blind eye. There are just some people who need help. And it's on the landlord side as well, which is Assemblywoman Kasama mentioned, putting that $5 million together for landlords to say, look, if you have a tenant who just isn't getting it done and you don't want to evict them, but you'd like to get paid, we have a process for you to go through. There's an informational component to that. I mean, landlords don't know that exists. I think the realtors and the apartment association have done a good job of getting that information out, but we can set up all the programs in the world, but if people don't know about them, don't apply for them, we don't assist them, then what good are we doing other than just having a show horse rather than a workhorse?
You're an experienced attorney. Assemblywoman Kasama is very experienced in her business, and I want to wrap this discussion about 486 in this issue by asking you both a very simple question, and I hope you'll give a candid answer. And let me start with Assemblyman Yeager, since I've been starting with Assemblywoman Kasama on most of these. This is a citizen legislature. And so, but yet you've been a lawyer for quite some time. Were you surprised at all? Did you learn anything during this entire process, and where you said, where there were some aha moments for you, like, I didn't know this existed, we need to deal with it? Was it a learning experience for you too?
Are you talking about 486 in particular, John?
Just in general, the whole issue of tenant-landlord relationships and the laws that exist, and of course, 486 is the omnibus bill that we've been talking to. There were some other legislation passed, as both of you know, but I'm just talking in general, because I think people need to have a sense of that, and that while most of the legislators I've dealt with over the years, despite their relative abilities and talents and backgrounds, do try hard, but you're still citizens. And so I'm just wondering if you as an experienced lawyer were looking to say, wow, I didn't know we did it like that in this state. We need to address that.
Absolutely. No, 100%. I don't think there's any issue I've ever worked on in the legislature where I don't say, aha, I had no idea. And including things that I'm supposedly familiar with, when it comes to criminal law in particular. But, landlord tenant's interesting because my wife used to do some of the eviction court when she was the justice of the peace. So I felt like I had a good understanding of how this worked. But I thought it's extraordinarily complex in terms of like what the landlord has to do, what the tenant has to do, then what the court does. So at some point I asked legal aid, I said, again, I'm a visual learner. I'm like, can you prepare a chart, like a flow chart that walks me through this? Because I feel like I'm not understanding. It's a 3-day notice, a 5-day notice, a lockout, and it's all these different terminologies. And then, they apply differently to residential versus if you're in a mobile home versus you're in something else. So we had that whole issue of not all housing is the same. So they prepared a document for me. And there were so many boxes and so many different paths you could take. And I will tell you it was helpful, but I learned a heck of a lot looking at that. And then when Assemblywoman Kasama came in and gave me the perspective of look, and this is going to sound obvious, but when we think of landlord tenant, a lot of times we think of these big, huge complex, right? The Siegel suites, the budget suites, the huge apartments. Well, that's only a part of our rental market. We have individuals renting rooms. We have people with smaller units. So I will say, I think I failed to understand the complexity and the nuance in terms of different tenants and different landlords. So a long lawyerly way of saying, I learned a lot through this process. And I'm thankful for Assemblywoman Kasama and for the Realtors and Apartment Association for coming in and saying, look, you might not be seeing the whole picture. And I think as a result, we got better legislation out of it.
I'll ask you the same question, Kasama, in kind of a different way, is that you've been in this business for some time. You understand it from a perspective that many others don't have. Were you surprised at all? Did you learn anything during this process in which you said, wow, I've been in this business for a while, but I didn't realize this was going on, or we could do things this way, or tenants could do things this way?
Absolutely. I learned so much. I did serve on the Judiciary Committee with the Assemblyman, and I do not come from a legal background. I was a CPA previously, so very much an accounting financial background. And to be sitting on the Judiciary Committee and hearing all of these laws, legalities, I did feel like I was studying to be a lawyer from all the committee hearings and the information and briefing and looking at these things. And so I learned a tremendous amount. I still have a lot to learn. There are so many nuances, and you know, I think our job, it is a citizen legislature, but it is our jobs to be learning as much as we can, and also you know, looking at unintended consequences from different things and different laws that we pass. And that's why it's good to have different voices and robust discussions so that we do end up with better legislation that is good for all of us. And I would just like to add a story with the owners of the properties when the pandemic first hit, because I think it's important for people to understand this too. When the pandemic first hit, I could see that people were going to lose their jobs. People were going to be unemployed. This was going to be a big crisis. So I reached out very early to all of my owners of the properties and said, this is what I think is going to happen. These people are going to be losing their jobs. They won't be able to pay rent, but that means it's going to be community wide. So this is going to be an issue everywhere, not just with your properties. So if we kick them out, we don't have anybody else to move in that has a job. And so I am suggesting that all of you work with them. And so my suggestion to my owners was, let's reduce rent to half, give them 2 months free rent, 3 months free rent, give them a chance to figure this out, get unemployment coming in, and then ramp up again slowly for full rental payment. Every single owner agreed with me. And so I want people to understand that I'm not talking about being heartless or that. I'm just talking about there are ways to do it. And I told them, I said, we all have to band together as a community to figure out a solution that will work for everybody. Every single owner said, that's a great idea. We'll work with you on that. You just tell us what we need. And so there was, you know, there was agreement and trying to find out solutions from a community basis. I'm very proactive in reaching out to people to try and come up with solutions. And so, you know, unfortunately, we have, you know, in any area of industry or careers, you know, there's always the bad actors that cause, you know, the most amount of grief and the most headlines. But I found overwhelmingly all the owners I talked to wanted to find solutions for everybody.
So we have a little under 15 minutes left, and I never assume that a group with a special interest is only interested in that special interest. They're people, they're citizens too, and I'm sure the folks watching this down the road are interested in some of the more global issues that came up during the session and continue to be. And I want to ask you about a couple of them, if I might. And unfortunately, this became somewhat of a partisan discussion too, even though I don't think it's a partisan issue. There was a lot of talk about the governor's powers during the pandemic and his emergency powers and what he was able to do, essentially unfettered by the legislature with no checks and balances was the criticism. This is not, as I said, a partisan issue. This should be discussed whether the governor is a Republican or a Democrat, especially in a time of crisis like that. That essentially was shut down because the governor is a Democrat, whether you agree with what he did at every point or not, and the legislature is controlled by Democrats. It seems to me, unless you folks, both of you, both parties, want to render yourselves essentially irrelevant during a time of crisis and let the governor do what he wants, that this is the kind of thing that should be examined next session. Look at the governor's powers. Of course, the governor's going to have some emergency powers, but how far do they go? It seems to me, Assemblyman Yeager, and I'll start with you, since my criticism is not quite obliquely of your party for not allowing this discussion to occur. It seems to me that that is a problem for the legislature, that the legislature should have more authority than it had to be a check, if necessary, on what a governor could do. What do you think of that very long question that I just asked?
That was a great question. Just a couple of points to frame the issue, really. We're a part-time legislature. We meet every other year. I think there's only maybe 3 or 4 states that still do that. We're the second smallest legislature in the country. Most of us have day jobs. If you're lucky enough to be independently wealthy or retired, perhaps you don't. And so our system of government here in Nevada, and this is per our Constitution, when it was written in 1865, the executive has a ton of power. And I think the balance of power, certainly in this state, favors the executive branch. I mean, we're talking about Assembly Bill 486. If we need to fix that bill, we probably can't do it until February of 2023. So, our citizens, in a way, have said, look, and we want the executive in the state to have more power. That's the way the system is set up. So, that's a reality of it. In terms of the governor's powers, the governor needs to have emergency powers because, how long would it have taken the legislature to try to get into session and to deal with this when, the pandemic sort of struck, it seemed like almost overnight. It wasn't here and then it was. And I guess I would push back a little bit on the notion that we don't have any sort of check because we now have the ability under our state constitution to call ourselves into special session. We didn't used to have that ability. So the governor really could hamstring us, right? He or she could do whatever they wanted and they would just have to wait until the next regular session. With a 2/3 vote, we have the ability to call ourselves into special session and to make adjustments. In my view, I don't think that's been necessary. If this governor or a future governor did something that I think was so beyond the pale in responding to a pandemic, I don't think you'd have a problem finding a bipartisan 2/3 majority to call ourselves into special session and rein that in. So, the fact that we haven't done that, I think shows that, in my view, the majority of us think the governor's doing a good job. I mean, he's got a tough position he's in. Whatever he does, he's going to get criticized by 48 or 49% of the populace. But I think overall we've that's sort of where that has landed. And so, it's just the way it is until our citizens, and this may never happen until they say, we want the legislature to meet on a more regular basis. We want a more professional legislature. We're going to have this imbalance of power between the executive and the legislative branch. And I'll tell you, as a member of the legislative branch, I wish we had a little bit more time to meet and to vet some of these issues. Maybe we wouldn't be scurrying at the day 119 of a 120-day session to get bills right. But this is what our citizens want. And so until that Constitution changes, this is kind of the system we have to live under.
What do you think, Assemblyman Kasama, of that general issue? I mean, listen, you're a newbie, but you've paid attention through the years, I'm sure, a little bit to what the legislature did, and enough to suddenly decide that you wanted to be part of it. We can discuss it another time whether you regret that. But what about that push and pull and separation of what the governor can do and what you can do to check him? Whether it's, again, this is a nonpartisan issue, in my opinion, what powers the governor should have and what powers the legislature should have to check him.
Well, I think it's a great question. I love that you're asking this. And I think, one, yes, I think the governor has to have emergency powers for emergencies. And you're absolutely right. This is a nonpartisan question, a nonpartisan issue, because if there was a Republican governor in place, frankly, I wouldn't want him having emergency powers for 12 months. And so I think the question is, what is the definition of an emergency and how long should they have that power? And I think that would be a great discussion at the legislature. I think, is it 30 days or 60 days. And then I think you should go back to the legislature and we should be part of the discussion. How we want to handle the state, what are we going to do? I don't think the governor should be burdened with that much of a responsibility for 12 months. So it's, the COVID is no longer an emergency. It's a way of life. It's part of the fabric of what we're dealing with on a daily basis. And it's going on for over 12 months. And so the legislature should be brought in. It should not be just the governor making the decisions at this point. So it is a great question. I think it should be open to discussion. I think we should have a time limit on it. What is that? That would be a great, robust discussion for the legislative side. What is that time frame that we could all agree on? And I hope that we do that.
It's interesting because Assemblyman Yeager brought up, and I think is very salient here, is about the process itself. And in my opinion, and I've been watching it, I won't even tell you how far back, what year it was, but I've been watching it for quite some time. And it's frustrating to me as just an observer. And I'm sure it's frustrating to a group like the folks who are watching today and many others. The process is remote from people in Southern Nevada, even though I think the legislature has done a great job of video conferencing and trying to bring people in, even from Southern Nevada. But meeting every other year for a finite time, a relatively short finite time to deal with complex issues, some of them hopelessly complex, and they're not the only issues you're dealing with. There are hundreds of bills. And as I said, I think most legislators are very earnest and try to learn as much as they can. You don't have a lot of staff up there. And the reason I'm going through this long introduction again is that I don't think a lot of people, even some people watching this down the road, really understand how strapped you all are for help and for time to really consider the issues. And they can already tell from watching this that you're both very intelligent and dedicated people. And even so, you probably both felt overwhelmed at times up there. And I want to ask you, both of you, a simple question in the time that we have left. And I'll start with you, Assemblywoman Kasama, and Assemblyman Yeager is smiling because he knows it's not going to be as simple as I'm suggesting it might be. And I really I've given this a lot of thought over the years. I've written a little bit about it. I haven't come to any conclusions on how to fix it. But isn't the process itself broken, Assemblywoman Kasama? It's broken, isn't it?
So I am a freshman. I'm new to the process. I'm shocked, frankly, at how the process is run. I think, everybody can sit there and be a spectator in the arena, and until you're on the playing field, it is quite shocking, this process we do go through. And I agree, we have bills presented, we have people voting on it. As myself, I'm not an expert in the legal, I'm on the judiciary. My vote is the same as somebody else. I studied the bills, I tried to read up and study, and it's up to everybody that's voted in there how much they're going to be dedicated to that. And it's the same voice and equal vote, and there it goes. The bill goes through, and you're like, I don't think that's good for our state. That bill that just went through, or that was a good bill that went through. And so it is kind of a shocking process. Before I went up there, I really felt strongly that our state has grown in population. We should be meeting every year, less time. I mean, we meet for 120 days every 2 years. Let's meet for 60 days every year. That sounds very logical, right? And because we have these bills that it takes us 2 years to fix them if we've done something wrong, because it is a tough process going through. I do have a little hesitation after I've been up there because, as Mark Twain said, a lot of damage is done when the legislature is in session. And now I'm thinking, like, if we go up there every year, we're going to get some more really bad bills going through more often. And so I have a little pause there. But I think, just the size of our state, we're probably getting closer to warranting something like that as we grow with population, because it takes too long to fix some of the unintended consequences. And you hear that when people come in, they're very frustrated. Various industries are stuck for 2 years because something went through that is really harming to them. And so that's pretty eye-opening. And so that I was a little long-winded again. Thank you.
No, I'm glad you said all of that. And it's because it's interesting to hear a freshman's perspective. But Assemblyman Yeager, I mean, you talk about people in business, like a lot of people who will be watching this once this tape is played, and other people in business or not in business, whoever they are, they're remote from the process. The realtors, by the way, are very lucky, and I say this unabashedly, to have a lobbyist like Rocky Vincent, who is respected by both sides of the aisle, works very hard, is diligent, and so they're lucky to have him. Not all businesses have that quality of lobbyist, and a lot of damage can be done during a session, but it seems to me a lot of damage can be done, and kudos to Assemblyman Kasama for saying that it's a little bit eye-opening when you get up there, because you do only have 2 years. You have 2 years to have to endure a mistake that you guys might have made, and the change of having 2/3 of you able to call you into session, that ain't going to happen anytime soon. We all know that. So I'll ask you again the same question. You've been there for a while now. Doesn't it frustrate you? Isn't the process broken?
Thanks, John. And I want to echo your comments. Carrera, Nevada, Rocky, and Jenny are fantastic. They never hesitate to educate me and disabuse me of notions that are incorrect. So they do a wonderful job. I wouldn't agree that it's broken. I would say it's not ideal. I mean, this is a system of government that was set up when we became a state, 150 plus years ago. And so our population looked a little different. The state looked a little different. Yet here we are with 3 million people and a 42-person legislature who meets 120 days every other year. So it's not ideal. I mean, citizens are not getting the best representation they can get on the state level. As a result of that, as we talked about, the executive has a lot of power, and local governments, frankly, have a lot of power here, county commissions, city council. And so sometimes it does feel like the legislature is kind of the stepchild relegated to the basement, and we sort of get together and people endure what we do. So yeah, that is frustrating. And, I think for anyone out there with a full-time job, imagine if you have this full-time job where you're making money and you say, I want to do public service. And then that public service job becomes like an 80-hour-a-week job on the side. And so it's tough, right? And our constituents don't know whether we're in session or whether we're not. They don't just call when we're in session, and we have people who are helping staff us that they call my cell phone every day. So in some ways it's harder and more difficult between sessions when, you're trying to be a good wife, a good husband, a good father, a good mother, trying to keep your job, trying to keep your sanity, trying to stay in shape. So those things are tough. So it really, really is public service. And I think most of us try to do a great job, but John, what really concerns me, one of the things that keeps me up at night is if at some point we don't reform this process, I just think it's going to be increasingly difficult to find hardworking, smart, there for the right reasons sort of people who want to be in the legislature, folks like Assemblywoman Kasama, and I could name a lot of others. But, in the world we live in today, it's getting harder and harder to present this as an option to somebody and have them say, yeah, that sounds like a rational choice for me to make. I want to be in the legislature where I have to relocate. I'm going to lose money. I'm going to be away from my family. I'm going to get destroyed on social media 24 hours a day. I mean, these are real difficult issues, not just for Nevada, for the entire country, but I think they're aggravated in Nevada by the fact that we are part-time and we just don't have a lot of support in between. And as you said, we're tasked with vetting 1,000 bills, many of which have nothing to do with anything we're familiar with in our real life.
Well, I just want to say first that I am shocked to hear that your constituents have your cell phone number, but I don't, and so that's very disturbing to me. But seriously, what both of you said, I'm glad you said it in front of this group. It's very true, and I've been writing for years about how it's going to get more and more difficult to get good people, good smart people up there. With the way the process is, and it should not be every other year for 120 days. It just doesn't make sense, and people don't realize because they have lives, right? That kids to get off to school, jobs to get to, all the rest of it. They don't realize the nuances of the process and the compressed schedule of deadlines and all the rest of it. And so I hope more serious thought is given by groups, influential groups like the Realtors, because the pressure is going to have to come from the outside. To really change this. And finally, I want to say how lucky the state is to have folks like you, considering the sacrifices that you probably both made for your real jobs, to spend 4 months away from them. It is a real sacrifice. And even though people, I don't know where they get this impression, think I'm some kind of cynical or jaded person, I actually have tremendous respect. And I think Assemblyman Yeager knows this, and Assemblywoman Kasama will find this out about me, for the people who go up there. It's more the process than the people, in my opinion, that is the problem. Having said that, one sacrifice that both of you have made is to come here on a Saturday to tape this, and I hope people appreciate it. I certainly do, and it's been a real pleasure to talk with both of you. Thanks for coming.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for moderating, Jon, and Assemblywoman Kasama. Good to see you, and I'm sure we'll all be together in Carson City soon.
Absolutely.
All right.
Hey again, everybody. It's the tail end of day one of your fabulous state conference. That was Heidi Kasama, Steve Yeager, and of course, Jon Ralston. Now, we have some big name draws coming up. We got the Battleborn Club subscription, and that's 2 first and second names get that, and then the Silver State Club subscription. And these subscriptions are giving away, the giveaways entitle the holders to invitations to special events. So we're gonna give those away. I'm gonna press a little button and then let them know to get these tickets to you. You got to be present to win on this. And tomorrow, we've got some great stuff, but stay on the website to create some connections. Who do we got? I got my glasses here, and Amy Shockett. I'm hoping I pronounce that kind of like rocket. And then you get one of the Battleborn Club subscriptions and number 2. And here we go for the other Battleborn. And then we'll go to the Silver State. And tomorrow, the events feature Kenny Purcell, Dave Tina, Linda Reinberg, Kevin Sigstadt, and let's see, I got my glasses. Joan Bennett, well done. You get the other Battleborn, and now we are the Silver State Club subscription. And remember, you get invitations to special events and tickets. And tomorrow, we also have the legal team of Tiffany Banks and Crystal Keegan for questions. I might even do some comedy. Today was just a little bit long, but man, it was informative. Joe Dunfield gets the Silver State Club subscription. So stay on to create some connections, earn those gamification points, and show up tomorrow for more fun and prizes. This has been a delight. What wonderful speakers. Robert Morris, Amy Blankston, and of course the people we just saw, Jon Ralston, Steve Yeager, and Heidi Kasama, and Brad Spires, and Teresa McKee, and everybody that was part of this. I've been Steve Brunner, and we will see you tomorrow, bright and early. Happy Thursday evening.
The Nevada Independent is a nonprofit news outlet covering all things politics in the state of Nevada.
We believe that whether it's subscribing to your favorite local news source or supporting the Nevada Independent, which is statewide, but also endeavors to cover local races, that membership is the best way to do that.
Like many industries over the years, journalism has been battered in a variety of ways, particularly at the local level.
At a time where there's so much misinformation, half information, people trying to massage and manipulate the news in a wide variety of ways, it's more important than ever to have a solid, reliable source of good journalism to rely upon.
I know all of us here at the Nevada Independent are really accessible over email and Twitter. I know I try to respond to as many reader emails as I possibly can if it's a quick question that I have the answer to. And I think you just have that sort of direct connection to local reporters that you might not, if you're reading a national publication or reaching out to a reporter at a national publication.
There are so many things going on in our world, in our state, in our local governments that will never be covered unless there is a robust group of journalists in a given community.
There are already way more stories than there are journalists to cover them. I see this all the time on my beat, whether it's writing about water, public land, or climate change. Politicians and government officials are making decisions every day that affect people on the ground and will have an impact in many cases for generations to come. Local journalism is essential to holding policymakers accountable for those decisions and vetting them fully so the public has an opportunity to comment and participate.
But if you don't have local outlets, then you're not going to be able to hold people in power to account. You're not going to be able to help explain the world to people who don't have time to investigate it or write about it the way that our journalists do. And so I think we perform a valuable service for the community.
My favorite part about being a reporter for the Nevada Independent and being a part of this team is that I get to work so closely with my community and highlight their stories, their experiences, and the issues that affect them the most.
News isn't free, even though our website is and anyone can read it whenever they want. We're a nonprofit, so we rely on your donations to keep going and keep us funded. So please donate if you can, and we will keep providing you the best quality news that we can.
I'm Mark O'Brien with the RX Abuse Leadership Initiative, or RALI. While it's still too early to determine the full impact of COVID-19 on the addiction crisis, some trends are emerging. Around the country, individuals, families, and communities are being increasingly challenged by substance misuse and addiction. We are losing far too many Americans to overdoses. As we continue working to stay safe during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's important to remember that this is an especially difficult time for anyone struggling with addiction or in recovery. RALI convenes national, state, and community leaders to exchange best practices and provide resources that help prevent misuse of prescription medicines. We're proud to call the Nevada Realtors a partner in these efforts. Organizations across the state are coming together to share solutions that work and making important progress against the opioid crisis. Safe disposal is essential for prevention of substance misuse. It's an easy step we can all take, and it all starts in our home. We need to commit to safely storing prescription medications and safely disposing of unused medicines when they're no longer needed. You can do your part today by taking just a few minutes to clean out your home medicine cabinets and finding a nearby safe disposal location. These two simple steps can prevent misuse and addiction and help save lives. To learn more, visit rallinv.org. That's RALINV.org. Thank you, Nevada Realtors, for always protecting Nevada communities by helping to address the opioid crisis from home.
I'm Sam Olson, and it is my privilege to serve you on the Nevada Realtors Diversity and Inclusion Committee. There's been a focus on diversity in both the public and private sectors and across many industries. But housing impacts every aspect of a person's life. Where we live drives where we can work, what opportunities we have, and what resources we have access to. And this puts us, realtors, front and center in this effort. Whether we acknowledge it or not, we shape the communities we serve. To support our efforts, your committee has been working on a message to share our vision of how we can make the greatest impact to our clients and communities. The video will premiere in December at our state installation. Let's take a look.
For over 70 years, realtors have helped build strong, vibrant communities.
From mining towns and homesteads to today's cities and towns, realtors lead the way.
From the very beginning, Nevada was built by dreamers, visionaries, and adventurers
looking for a better way to make a place where everyone fits.
Carved from the mountains and springing forth from the desert, together we made that dream a reality.
Creating opportunity for those drawn here to seek it.